Going to get started. I know people will come in as they can, but don't want to lose any time for the great session today. My name is Julian Weinrib. I'm the director in the Office of the Vice Provost, Innovations in Undergraduate Education. We're coordinating this series, and we'd really like to sincerely thank you for joining us today to learn more about innovative ways that you can spark and retain student engagement in your remote learning activities. I also like to thank all of our speakers today who have given their time and energy and effort at a time when things are challenging and preparations for the fall are considerable, and so we really appreciate their efforts. Before we begin, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I will say that this is the last in a series of 8 webinars on adapting experiential learning for remote delivery. The series has been successful thanks to the time and effort committed to by all of our speakers and the strong engagement from our participants. To learn more about the other sessions, please view our SharePoint site, where you can watch session recordings and browse through all of the available resources and materials. The site's available to all University of Toronto faculty and staff, and links to this information will be provided to you by email after today's session. So to ensure that we have as much time as possible, I'd now like to turn it over to my colleague, Laurie Harrison, who will take it away. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Julian. I've turned on my video for a minute to say hello and just so you can see my face and to welcome you all, although I will turn it off shortly to ensure my audio quality is as good as it can be. My name is Laurie Harrison, and I am the Director of Online Learning Strategies here at the university, and have had the opportunity to work with Julian and the team in the Vice Provost for Innovation in Undergraduate Education's office on experiential learning resources for adaptation during this time. We sent you 2 documents as pre-work that offer some of the more technical and practical overview of what you might consider including as you're planning your activities for the fall term and beyond. So there are some details there that you can reference if you're looking for more practical how-tos. What we're aiming to do with this session with the great speakers that we have is to take more of a high-level look at strategies and some example activities that they've used and their observations on what effective strategies might be useful to this group, which is quite a mix, I have to say. I see lots of names that I recognize from other contexts, and we have all manner of instructors and support staff and others who are involved in experiential learning here today. So I hope that you find something that mates with you and has some strategies you can take away. We will first introduce our session speakers to get things started. We have Katja Bramsveld, who's in psychology at the Scarborough campus, Professor Safia Magdadem, who's also from Scarborough in the Department of Language Studies. We have Willow Cabral, who's a student who's presenting today. We're very pleased to have her join us. She's in geography at FAS. And finally, we'll wrap things up with a presentation from Fiona Rall, who's the Associate Dean Undergraduate at UTM. Great lineup, so pleased to have them with us today. We will have the chat open, so if you want to make comments or post your questions there, some of them we may answer on the fly, either moderating the chat as we go, or we may hold some of them for our Q&A at the end. So questions of clarification or comments or resources that you'd like to share are welcome. Our game plan is pretty simple, the introduction, which I'm doing right now. Our panelists will each do a short presentation, and then we'll have roundtable Q&A where you can bring your ideas and questions forward, and we will do our best to come up with some suggestions and solutions. Just to get things started, we wanted to do a little warm-up exercise. Oh, there's a poll. Quick question there, if you consent to having this session recorded. We'll just do that before we proceed. I don't see any no's there. And I'm going to go on with the presentation here. We have a quick poll for you. So turning to the chat tool, which is a little bubble off to the lower right, if you click on the purple button, and then you end up with a little bubble that looks like a bubblegum bubble, but it's actually a chat feature. And our question for you is 2 or 3 words. Share what the word engagement means to you. So we're often talking about engagement. So let's just do a little brainstorm here. Melanie says transformative learning. Trish says activity, communication, inviting, connection, curiosity. Curiosity, that's a great one. Thank you, Fiona. Active learning, that's a theme. Dialogue, exchange, interaction. Sarah says reciprocity, that's an important concept. Involvement, all senses. All right. Relationship building, thank you, Jennifer, that's a good one too. Belonging, so sense of community. So we're seeing some other ideas coming through there. Relevance, that ties in with authenticity. Deeply pedagogical, yes. Linking this to meaningful learning. Sharing, okay, these are all great ideas and still rolling in. Okay, all right, so we've got things going here, we've got a flow going, and is that a hand up? I'm not sure. Okay, so continuing on then, we're planning this session, and as we were talking about the types of ideas that we'd like to present, we identified a few themes. These are strategic themes that I want to touch on before we begin and foreground for you. So hold these in your mind as you hear the presentations of the panelists. These are high-level ideas that might form your thinking. The first theme that we have is designing for digital first. We encourage participants to consider reframing your approach, and rather than trying to copy or mirror what was done in your face-to-face processes, exactly to rethink for an online space and design for the online space rather than trying to replicate in some manner. So think about how you might approach your activity or your course or your co-curricular program for designing for digital first. A second key strategic theme is focusing on authentic learning experiences, and that was just mentioned in the chat. So whether it's a small group or a large group, thinking about how you as an instructor can curate experiences. What experiences can you pull in for your students that are going to be relevant and meaningful and inform them in an authentic manner? And then thirdly, to leverage the opportunity for creative approaches. So the COVID-19 context certainly throws a whole new lens on the broader environment, and actually taking advantage of that to introduce meaningful experiences that are directly relating to the current shifting landscape is another theme that we had in our discussions when we were planning this session. So again, I'll invite you to put in the chat if you have any other key themes that you've come across that you want to share at this time. Broad ideas, broad underpinnings for thinking about designing for experiential learning. We may come back to this later. Suggestions? Okay, we'll come back to that in the Q&A, and you can think about that and reflect on that during the presentations. So the kinds of questions that we heard that you submitted during the registration, you wanted some ideas for keeping students engaged and motivated online, suggestions for connecting outside the classroom, looking for advice on inclusive online space, and where we have traditional, quote, circle-based community building, adaptation to remote and dual delivery contexts. This is a sampler of some of the questions and other all manner of questions in this group. So we are going to try and address some of these questions in our presentation, and then, as I said, we'll follow up further in the Q&A for anything that we didn't cover during the panelists' individual presentations. So let's begin. And first off, we're going to have Kasia Bramsfeld, and she's going to talk about creating micro experiences in asynchronous large lecture courses. So Kasia, over to you.
Hi, so hello, my name is Kasia, and one of the great things about this presentation is I think that each of the speakers is bringing in sort of a range of ideas for a range of different courses. And so I think one of the things that we're going to be challenging you to do is to really think about experiential learning within the context of your environments, whether that be a course or a workshop or within your office environments where you're trying to engage fellow employees. And in that process, what I'd like to do is kind of re-envision what we might think of as experiential learning. So we tend to think of experiential learning as really group-based with a lot of face-to-face interactions and a lot of opportunities for students to bounce ideas off of one another. And if we think of experiential learning in that context, and then we think about this enormous task ahead of us in terms of switching to online learning, this can seem really, really overwhelming. And just to give you an example of this is my challenge. I teach a second-year research methods course, and this course has 270 students this summer. It will have 800 students in it this fall. The course is offered entirely in an asynchronous online learning context. We do not have the students meeting at the same time at any point in the course. And so this offers real challenges in terms of doing any kind of group-based activity. And then my department is quite generous in terms of providing TA support, but of course the TA support that's being provided is being consistent with providing TA support for a lecture-based course. It's not consistent with providing TA support for a tutorial-based or a lab-based course. So engaging 800 students in an asynchronous environment is a real challenge. At the same time, moving to online offers some real advantages over a face-to-face environment. So one of the things that students have reported to me is, and that I've seen is shyer students often are hesitant to speak up in class, especially in these really large lecture courses where maybe you have 300 students sitting in a lecture hall all together. Shyer or more introverted students may not talk, and even when students are talking, we may only be able to call on a couple of students with a few times within a 2 or 3 hour lecture. So online learning actually gives more students a greater opportunity to engage, because if you plan it well, then each and every student can have an opportunity to make a contribution. So one advantage of online learning is it really offers an opportunity to engage each and every student in a course, which may not always be possible in a face-to-face environment. It also allows us to engage students at a deeper level. So when my course met face-to-face, it was for this 1 3-hour block of time. And so that didn't really give us always an opportunity to space out our thinking about issues. The beauty of an online environment is different discussions can actually be broken up over time so that students are engaging with different pieces of it throughout the week. So this really gives students a chance to kind of think and reflect on things. So online learning can also offer a deeper learning experience. And then also, when we're in a classroom environment, students have their cell phones, but again, there's not always the time for students to look things up online in real time. So there's really also this opportunity to create opportunities for students to bring in their own experiences or bring in activities or bring in real life examples that may not always be as integrated in a face-to-face context. So I have kind of viewed this online learning switch as an opportunity to create a variety of micro experiences. And keeping in mind that like a big project may not be possible in my context, or at least I'm not ready to tackle that quite yet, I've instead decided to create a series of small micro experiences to engage the students. So I'm just going to share with you 3 examples. One of them oriented around collecting and analyzing data, another around analyzing real-world case studies, and then I'm very, very briefly going to talk about this idea of finding online communities, because there may be online demonstrations that exist out there for your use. And I'm going to do this really quickly because we want to give, obviously I want to give other speakers time to talk, but we can circle back to any of these if you're interested in hearing more during the Q&A. So The first thing that I do is I use what I have, and what I have right now is a series of videos of me engaging with students. So my course has always been offered in what's called a web option context, which is a format that's available out at UTSC. And so my live lectures are recorded for students to watch after the fact. So that's made my transition to online learning a little bit easier. At the same time, these are unscripted videos, and like a lot of people, I tend to use verbal utterances. So one of the ways that I teach measurement theory is I have a little bit of fun with that. So I have students actually watch me engage in a video lecture about measurement theory, and I have them record how many times I say so, or and they love it because, of course, they get to sort of make fun of me a little bit, which is always fun. And then they record their data online using Google Forms. And then Google Forms allows them to see the data right away. And so this allows me to engage the students in questions like, does this seem to be a reliable way to measure verbal utterances? So we can see here from this graph that people guesstimated that I used anywhere from 1 to 22 verbal utterances, so maybe not a very reliable measure. At the same time, there does seem to be some consistency in the average. So we kind of talk about this idea in statistics, sometimes the truth is in the middle. And then I engage them in a discussion over how they could improve the coding scheme in order to improve reliability. So this is an example of me engaging students in an asynchronous way where they're getting to benefit from each other's data. It feels interactive, but they're not actually having to meet in real time. Another example of this is when I'm introducing some core research methods concepts. I have them find media articles that report research, and then they post these on an online discussion board. And what they do is they post the strongest claim being made in the article, and they just post the claim. They don't post the article, or they post a link to the article, but no more details. And then what they do is that they try to guess what they think the evidence would be like. So who is the sample? Who do they think was sampled to gather this evidence? What variables do they think they were used? So this is a great way to introduce some of the terminology for the class. And then as a follow-up reflection activity, the students take their classmates' guesses about what the evidence should be like, and they compare it to what's actually being reported in the article. So this is a great critical thinking activity and a great way to engage students with one another about real-world issues without them having to meet face-to-face. And then the other thing that I would recommend that you do if you have not already done is reach out to any teaching societies that might exist within your discipline. So one of the things that has just been really amazing, despite all the stress of COVID, is that I'm on the Society for Teaching of Psychology website, and we are doing these massive information sharing. And what I have discovered is that there are all these resources that exist out there that I didn't even know about, and I'm now learning about them as a consequence of us all having these shared struggles. And in the process, I've discovered more and more simulations that I can integrate into the class. They don't require me to build the content. They already exist. So I would really encourage you to really seek out and see if there may be simulations that exist within the courses. So anyway, I see that there's some questions being posted, so I'm going to sign off to the next speaker, and in the meantime, I'll read your questions, and then we can circle back to those during the Q&A. So on to, who's next?
Oh, it's me.
Okay, great.
Safia, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Kasia and Laurie. Hi, everyone. My name is Safia, and I'm going to talk about case studies for students' engagement. So basically, you can do what I'm going to talk about. Depending on the nature of your course, you can do it within a small enrollment course or a large enrollment course. So I do it with both of the courses that I usually teach. The first one is sociolinguistics, usually with 50 students, maximum 80 students. And the other course is my introduction to linguistics. Usually minimum is 650 students, and this coming fall I have 1,400 students. So for my small enrollment course, usually we have synchronous and asynchronous teaching. So some weeks, depending on the topic, the students attend a live session, and some weeks I just post a pre-recorded video. But for my large enrollment course, there's always a pre-recorded weekly lecture and live tutorial sessions. And the students in both courses, the students are always active on the discussion board. So how do we do it? So the first thing that we do at the beginning of the semester is create small study groups. So where students can actually work together, whether it's online on the discussion board during the live sessions or outside the course. They usually exchange information and they meet outside, again virtually. So now when it comes to case studies, what I usually do is I choose a topic or an issue, and this can be in the form of, for example, an interesting question. And the questions that I choose are usually accessible and relevant to their lives. And I make sure that the questions that I choose are challenging and complex with multiple answers or multiple correct answers. So this is one of the things that I do. I usually pose a question. I make sure that it's an interesting question and there would be multiple correct answers. Sometimes instead of a question, I get them to watch a video that summarizes a case. And this is one of my favorite ones. I prefer videos because they're more interactive and students love watching videos. And the other thing that I can do to start a case study or for the students to solve a case study is I give them a summary of a case study. Now, once they have the question, once they have, let's say, the video, which is the summary, I get the students to work together. Usually it's in groups of 4 that the students work together to solve the case study. And of course, when they get together, they do their little research, they collect data from the literature to come up with an answer. And usually they report their findings through journaling. So once they work together and they try to solve the problem, there's usually one leader in each group, and each week there will be a new leader, or for each case study there will be a new leader. So the leader should summarize, or together they summarize what they worked on and what worked well for them and what didn't work for them and why it didn't work. And then they submit a summary of what they worked on, or they submit a summary of their findings. And once they submit the summary, the next step, basically the summary is a report on their progress and their learning and what they found. Once they do that, we have discussions. So these discussions can be through our live sessions. For example, we do it on Blackboard Collaborate, where the students or 2 groups of 4 are put into one group and they basically exchange ideas. So 2 groups assess each other's work. Or they do it on the discussion board. For example, each group will post a summary of their findings and then other groups will reply to it. And then once we do that, which I call it think, pair, share, as a class, we meet in a live session, usually for 1 hour, to go over their answers and basically discuss the answers. So this is one of the things that we do to do a case study. In an in-person lecture, I usually ask the students, for example, I pose a question, students need to collect data, or for example, the students need to do interview or surveys. They actually go to the society and interview people. In some cases, we even have recordings, but in an online environment, they have to work with case studies because it's not possible to collect data anymore. And I've noticed this summer that students actually are very active, and I've noticed that they are more motivated than an in-person lecture because they get to work with each other within one group, and then 2 groups share their ideas with each other, and then everyone shares their ideas within a whole class. And now doing this has its own benefits, but then there are challenges as well. So getting to work in groups means developing relationships with others in an online setting that they love, but sometimes I've noticed that some groups just fall apart. 2 weeks ago, two of my groups fell apart because either they had a schedule conflict or they said, I don't like my group member. I had 2 emails saying, I don't want to work with her. She has an attitude. And I was thinking, oh my God, I need to find them a new group, or I just need to step in and do something about it. One of the other things that I've noticed about this type of activity is that they take responsibility for their own learning and they do most of the job, but they actually, it's not that we are not doing the job, but we are more like a facilitator when it comes to case studies. They take responsibility for their own learning. The other benefit is that they constantly report on their progress and the learning. It's usually through weekly summaries or weekly activities or discussion board activities, and they know what they've done so far and they know what they need to do to catch up. And one other thing that I told them is that you're learning from your successes and failures, if any. If any failures. But for example, when 2 of my groups fell apart a couple of weeks ago, I think that they learned that they need to learn how to work with other people. So I had to meet with these 2 groups separately and actually talk to them and say, okay, what are the issues? Let us just fix the issue. One other challenge that we also have is unpredictability, because you don't know if this type of activity would succeed or fail depending on the group members. Sometimes some groups contact me and say there's this one member who never replies to us, or there's this one member who's not motivated, or they don't want to do the work. So it's basically a form of risk taking and getting an adventure, and you don't know if it's going to fail or it's going to succeed. In most cases, we've been successful, but we also had our own challenges. That's all I have for what I do in my lectures in terms of case studies, how we approach a case study. And I'm gonna stop here so to give the time to the next speaker.
Thanks so much, Safi. We had quite a few questions from our audience about language courses. So you've given us an example from your experience in language learning, but they're great examples and advice that we can use across a lot of course contexts. And that's amazing that you're doing this with those large courses as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, and now we'll move on to Willow. And so Willow, I'll invite you to take over the moderation and share with us your insights.
Thanks, Lori. So hi, everyone. I'm Willow, a third-year student at the St. George campus. Just a quick little disclaimer, I am on my balcony at the moment because my building is unfortunately doing fire alarm testing. So I apologize for any noise and hope that you can hear me well. I just want to start by thanking you all for attending our webinar today, and I hope that my unique perspective as a student helps you gain better insights into how effective student engagement can be implemented in your own courses. So I'll be focusing on my own COVID-19 experiential learning experience, highlighting both common challenges and solutions that I have personally identified. So to begin, I took an experiential learning course offered by the Urban Studies program called INI 432, which focused on public participation in policymaking. This course ran entirely in the thick of the pandemic lockdown that we have all become accustomed to, from May to June 2020. Given that this is a fourth-year experiential learning experience, the class was quite small at 5 students. Prior to the pandemic, this class was meant to be done fully in person, with the only online component being the use of Quarkus. This class was a great opportunity for students interested in planning and policy work, as it was partnered with the City of Toronto. We were tasked with kickstarting the consultation process of the new Toronto Island Park Master Plan. Logistically, we were put into groups of 4 to 5 students. Each of these groups then worked together to plan and implement a self-directed consultation process. As mentioned earlier, this class was meant to be done totally in person. However, as we all know, the pandemic has forced us all to adapt. As a result, this was modified, and we were instead asked to develop both an asynchronous and synchronous component to our consultations. Okay, perfect. In terms of challenges, one of the most obvious and difficult was that of differing time zones. This was challenging for both live lecture attendance and group work. For instance, one of my teammates was in Singapore while another one was in China. Obviously, this made communication and collaboration quite challenging for everyone. Traditionally, public consultations are done totally face-to-face, whether that be through town halls, focus groups, or public booths. Prior to now, with the pandemic, any online public consultation was just a minor component of a larger in-person scheme. Never before had public consultation been solely online, as this goes against many consultation guidelines put forward by academics and professionals alike. That being said, there was a lot of discomfort in terms of treading through unknown territory. I just wanted to emphasize that it's important to note that this discomfort is felt both by student and teacher. Since we are in such a strange time, I think students are looking increasingly to their professors for guidance. Due to the pandemic, many of us students have been dismissed from our jobs, are unable to engage in extracurricular activities, far removed from campus life. Also, I'm so sorry for the background noise. For students like myself who are staying in Toronto due to lease agreements and other circumstances, we are also far away from family, in addition to the previously mentioned struggles. As such, many feel that our academics are the only shred of normalcy for us to hold on to and create this new normal. The absence, hold on, I'm so sorry. The absence of in-person communication methods. Let me actually move inside. I'm so sorry. You may hear some slight beeping from the fire alarm. I apologize, but
That
unfortunately I'm
sounds
not in a
fine.
good
It's
situation
fine,
today.
Mo. It's actually the audio's not that bad. You're doing great.
Okay, perfect. So where I left off, the absence of in-person communication methods not only makes communication challenging, but it also heightens this feeling of disconnect for both parties. That being said, I feel that a lack of instructor communication can make students feel even more isolated and unsupported than they may already feel. In that sense, communication is truly key during these trying times. I also think that the best way to interpret discomfort of transitioning to online learning is to think of it as growing pains. This is a learning opportunity for all of us, and who knows how these experiences may influence the future of learning. It's important also to remind ourselves that we are much more adaptable and resilient than we may think, and that it is, quite frankly, impossible to truly replicate an in-person experience in the online realm. Instead, I advise designing for the digital world by taking advantage of online tools that you would not have had the opportunity to use otherwise. One of the ways that class connectedness and community was built in my experiential learning course was through weekly discussions on class readings. On a weekly basis, we were asked to make a thoughtful reflection to readings and talk to classmates' reflections as well, which built familiarity between students. The syllabus was also reworked to include this activity as a participation grade. In terms of student camera use, I think this should be entirely optional for the student during lecture. While it doesn't hurt to encourage camera use, many students may feel uncomfortable on camera. However, in smaller group discussions, I think camera use can be effective for team building. Take, for example, my experience with the Toronto Island Park Master Plan. There was a lot of doubt, both on the sides of student and teacher, about the effectiveness of online-only public consultations. Like I said, fully online public consultation has never been done by Toronto City Planning before now. And there's the alarm, I'm so sorry. There's a lot of stress when trying to replicate an in-person experience online, whether that be an experiential learning experience or just lectures. I think that myself, my peers, and my professor all quickly realized that we must instead accept that online learning and interaction comes with limitations, but also benefits. By the end of the course, students ended up strongly impressing our City of Toronto contacts with just how many members of the public we managed to engage with and collect valuable insights from. Arguably, we would not have seen the same of success had we done everything in person as originally planned. The beauty of the internet is that you can utilize a plethora of online tools such as Zoom, Google Forms, etc., to increase accessibility, connect with a wider range of people, and collect data remotely. In this sense, we shouldn't see online learning as a hindrance, but rather as an opportunity to widen our intellectual and experiential scopes. And that's all I have to say today, so thank you.
Great. Thank you, Willow, both for sharing your experiences and also for modeling, as Fiona pointed out. Things happen, so you have to move inside, and we barely are hearing that alarm. So it's, I think, a lot more distracting for you than it is for us. But thank you for sharing and showing what great contributions students can make. This is experiential learning for you too right now, I guess. And I will turn it over to Fiona. Fiona, do you want to
Sure.
take it from here?
Thanks so much, Willow. That was really interesting. I just want to start by asking everyone a question in the chat. So if you look at the science of learning research and student academic success, there's one thing, if it happens within the first 1 to 2 weeks of term, will predict academic success throughout the term. Can you guess what that thing is? Can you just type it in the chat? What do you think? If this happens, it'll predict academic success in term. So just choose something. Lori says interaction, engagement, personal connection, whether they read the syllabus, whether they log on to the learning management system, absolutely. So there's a whole bunch of research that looks at what's predictive of academic success. And one of the main things that predicts academic success is establishing a peer connection in the class. And at the beginning, when Lori asked you to write down a word that you think of with engagement, a lot of you were mentioning these words. Like Sherry mentioned dialogue, Vivian belonging, Al mentioned working together. So if we can establish a meaningful community and we can get these peer connections happening in class, it has been shown to increase academic success, both online and in person. So I just wanted to follow up on a couple things, and I want to make sure we leave time for discussion. Kosha and Safia and Willow have shared so many interesting things. So following up on meaningful and true engagement, we've seen some examples of collaborative learning. Collaborative learning is much more effective if there's both immediate dialogue and then follow-up dialogue. So if there's a collaborative learning element within your course, it's really important to have dialogue, both immediately and follow-up. Examples of this could be in the chat tool. So the way Lori asked you a question and then you gave a word in the chat tool. In terms of follow-up, you could ask everyone to send a chat directly to you for feedback. And in the next class, you follow up. You say, these are the 3 most common themes I heard from the class. If you're soliciting feedback, it's really important to come full circle. It increases students' feeling of satisfaction in the class and increases a student's feeling of connection in the class if you use their quotes again later in class. But also a few other things on your radar. Within Quirkus, the Speed Grader tool can be used to give audio and video feedback to students when they submit assignments. It can be used in discussion boards. So if you have a collaborative group space with a discussion board, you can leave audio or video comments within that space. And again, data shows that increases feelings of connection within class. And also, more instructors are using Team Up. That's the third icon on the screen here. Team Up is an active learning app that you can use for groups to answer questions on their own. It's an app on their phone and then submit it to the class. They can also do it individually. But again, this is even more valuable when there's follow-up dialogue afterwards. So another example of an activity you can do to increase engagement is just to use the whiteboard. So I invite all of you right now to go up, press the T at the top of the screen, and you can select your color. And I want you to write the first word that you think of when you think of community. And we can just generate a word cloud together here. And so this can generate quite quickly in class, and it's easy to clear quickly as well, but you can see different words that people have. Another way to cultivate community is to get feedback on how students are feeling. So the first day of class, you can say, what are you most afraid of? And they can submit this anonymously via a Quarkus survey. And the next class, you can share it through a screen share, and again, it's anonymous. But then students realize that other students have the same fears as them, or other students also aren't feeling as prepared. Another thing you can do is ask students, what's your secret superpower? So we did this last fall with 1,000 students, and we asked them, what's your secret superpower that you can do? And we had a range of really interesting responses, from comical to serious. And then we shared that list anonymously with the class, and it really helped to build community. So I'm just going to clear the whiteboard here, and then we can keep going. Another thing that we need to remember is, if we look at science of learning studies, everything we should be doing should have an active learning element. And when you think of online engagement and community building, how can it be active learning if it's asynchronous? So here we're in a synchronous environment. I'm asking you to write on the whiteboard. I'm asking you to answer questions in the chat. There is a back and forth dialogue. And so when we talk to instructors about what works with them for active learning and asynchronous, there has to be an activity or an ask. If the students watch a 10-minute lecturette, they need to be directed to do something afterwards. But we also wanted to make sure this was on your radar, that you can embed forms directly into asynchronous videos. So we all have access to the Microsoft Office suite of products. You can record a video in Microsoft Stream and then embed Microsoft Forms. And so we have this one class, for example, we have 1,000 students in the fall doing lecturettes that are asynchronous before we do a synchronous activity. In those lecturettes, they have to answer questions as they go. So it is possible to make it active right within an asynchronous environment. And I just wanted to end it there so we have time for discussion. So Lori, it's back over to you. Oh, sorry. Thank you for reminding me. The one more thing I wanted to highlight. This really needs to be on everyone's radar, are challenges of access and inclusion. So there's a lot of literature online about moving to the online environment can reinforce barriers of access. There could be an entire week of sessions about how to do this, but 3 things to be on your radar. The first is your syllabus review, looking at which authors, which speakers, which chapters you're highlighting, and make sure there are diverse voices there. Second is using universal design for learning principles. That means making your course more flexible. And there are great webinars that CTSI has recorded, as well as UTM's Teaching and Learning Collaboration. But also one thing is name pronunciation, because we aren't meeting face-to-face. We aren't hearing students pronounce their names. On Quarkus, you can have an activity where each student records an intro video where they say, this is my name, this is how you pronounce it, and one interesting fact themselves. So it's really important to keep coming back to student names and saying them correctly, especially if you're going to be giving audio and visual feedback on the Quarkus gradebook. You want to make sure that you're saying the name correctly. So now, Lori, it's back to you.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. That was really interesting. You gave us some high-level insights, some evidence-informed guidance, and then you've rounded it out here with some practical advice and some linkage with Quarkus tools as well, which we could come back to further to talk about some of those audio tools in particular that you suggested. So we'll move now to a Q&A for 10 minutes or so. We do have a few more resources that we'll share to the end, but let's take some time now. I'm first going to go back to a question that followed on Safia's presentation, and I noted it down from the Q&A. And while I'm answering that, you can also think about your next question and add that into the text chat. You can ask questions of any of our instructors or or open questions for any of them to respond to. Christine asked about recommendations for tools for weekly reports and online journals. So Safi, I don't know if you would have a moment to, could you tell us what you used, and then if others have suggestions, they can chime in. Safi, I don't know if your mic's on or if you stepped away. I will make a few suggestions in the meantime. So you could use, you can use an assignment tool if you wanted to do individual reflections. You can have the prompts and have them submit as an assignment. You can even do it as a quiz where there's an open question and they submit it. That would be another way to collect data. You could also have, if it's shared, you could have them, if it's something they're sharing with their peers, you can use the discussion forum and have them each do a post that reports back on an activity or an experience that you're curating. And then a third possibility would be you could also use pages in Quirkus for co-constructed sort of wiki-style sharing of information if you wanted to share back some sort of ongoing record of activity. So those are a few suggestions that I have. Does anyone else have suggestions that they'd like to contribute? Okay, we can add them in the chat if anything comes to mind. Let's see. Rachel has a question. What data can you retrieve through forms in Microsoft Stream? Through form
I can take that one.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so you can retrieve all the data from forms within Microsoft Stream. You just have to, there's a setting where you get students to log in with their uTour ID before they watch the video, and then you can retrieve all the data that's there. So you can keep it open where you don't retrieve the data, or you can retrieve it in order to mark specific questions or to give participation points.
Yeah, Forms is a fairly new tool, and people are finding some really creative ways to use that, both for assignment submission and gathering data, like input, as Fiona was mentioning, getting submissions. And it also, interestingly, could be opened up to partners and externals as well, because you could set a form to be open. So that might be a tool where if you were looking for input from community partners or other agencies or organizations, that's an option. Let's see, what is the next question here? Are we allowed to use outside resources, for example, Google? There's some recommendations, some advice posted on the CTSI site that asks you to first use institutional resources if possible, because they're vetted, they're known to be secure. The use is well documented, and for support if you need any help with it. There are a number of reasons why. We have confidence in those platforms for our students. If you do decide that there's some other tool that you need to use because there isn't a tool internal to U of T, there's some guidance there to be careful around IT security, support needs, the stability platform, and particularly a requirement for a student to create an account. They may not wish to use social media in particular. They may not want to be involved in creating, certainly using a personal Google account or sharing their social media accounts. So I will look for the URL on that to share with the group around use of non-institutionally supported tools. Let's see, what is the next question? How many emails per week would be too many from all your course instructors based on your own experience? That's a question for Willow. Do you want to answer that one, Willow?
Sure. So that's a very good question. In my experience, the syllabus that the professor had created was very vague, so we definitely needed more communication in that course. But I think if you have a syllabus that's really thought out and kind of answers student questions before they come up, communication won't be as necessary on a, like, it's still good to have communication on a regular basis, but it won't be students sending messages all the time like, hey, can you clarify this? This doesn't make sense. So that's my advice.
Great, thanks.
I
And
would,
Kasha has a comment.
so I would say that one thing that's worked really, really well for me is that I have set up a Q&A discussion board that I strongly encourage students to post any general interest questions on. And what I tell them is that I basically have all eyes, all of our TA team and myself focused on the Q&A discussion board. So we try to give like a, sort of guaranteed quick response within 12 to 24 hours on the Q&A discussion board to incentivize them using it. And then that way, and then I also have a Q&A discussion board a discussion board to report errors. Because obviously if I make a typo that's causing confusion, I don't want to get 500 emails about it. And that has worked really, really well because it gives me a chance to kind of get a feel for what's happening with the students and not having to be overwhelmed by emails, but also having a way to communicate out to students without constantly having to post announcements or new emails. So that's something that's worked well for me in my large enrollment courses.
Great, thanks, Kasha. And I noticed up above that you had made a comment about privacy, and I just wanted to pick up on that briefly because we usually get a lot of questions about, for example, requiring students to appear on camera or whether things should be recorded if they're real time to accommodate students in different time zones and so on, which were also issues that Willow raised. And I'm going to draw your attention to some guidance that was recently drafted through the FIP office and from the provost's office, their privacy considerations, I think they're called. And I'm just going to post that in the chat right now. This is on the CTSI website. In addition to providing some guidance on privacy, there are also some syllabus samples for different options because not one size does not necessarily fit all. So you can take a look there if you're interested in what options you have. And I think the key there is communication with students of letting them know what the situation is so they can opt out or opt for a different activity or know what to expect. I've just moved on to another slide that I forgot to share with you. Here's some other prompts. If you have further questions that you want to put, if you have a challenging issue you want us to explore, or if you have any advice based, we have more than 60 people in the room here, so I'm sure some of you have advice to share as well. Let's see, I'm looking to see if there's any new questions. We had some questions during the in the registration form, so I might refer back to some of those and see if we can get an answer on this. One question that a number of people have raised is if you have dual delivery, some students in class while others are online at the same time, what kind of activity ideas? So do any of our panelists or if anyone else on the call has ideas around things you can do if you have students in class and online at the same time?
I have not tried this, but my partner, who teaches online now as well, has been asking the TA to monitor the chat while he lectures so that the TA can be answering questions live. And then if it's a question that the TA kind of feels like everyone in the class would benefit from, then there's that sort of private moderator chat that they go through to kind of highlight that. And so that's been allowing people to get live questions. I teach asynchronously, so I haven't tried it yet, but I love the idea and I plan on trying it. So maybe something to consider.
Thanks, Kasha, for sharing. There's a question here, does CTSI have a page on suggestions on active learning asynchronous? Yes, and I will go and look for that page and share that. There are actually a lot of resources on online or remote teaching, and they obviously apply equally to experiential learning as well. So I'll tap those and share that URL. I think there's also some resources in the closing slides here that you might be interested in, Susie, if you're wanting some ideas around doing things synchronously and asynchronously at the same time. I've also seen people who are considering doing breakouts if there are a few students in a shared space on campus, that they form groups, and that the remaining students, you put them into online breakout rooms at the same time, and they can have the advantage of face-to-face if they're in the same space, and participate equally if they're online. You can also do, if the students in the classroom have laptops, you can do polls, and they can do the polls at the same time as the people online. That would be another way that you can share back and forth across. So just a couple of ideas. Let me check back in the, Will is mentioning Don Boys. Yeah, he has a great video on dual delivery that Willow's Don Boysen, the Online Learning Academy and the Faculty of Arts and Science is a great resource on that. Oh, and Lauren's posted some resources as well.
And Stephen has his hand raised about
sorry.
comments related to using TAs in that tag team sort of way.
Thank you, Kasha. Stephen, do you want to share?
Hi. Yeah, so I taught an intro archaeology class, and we had like 75 students, and it was synchronous, but it was recorded for students who couldn't make it. But it actually worked out really well to have a TA kind of moderate the chat room. And then also what I found it did was, because I would check it as well, just kind of if it was a question that could be brought up, but it also kind of created more of a sense of community, and a number of the students even mentioned that when in the course evaluations and throughout the course, it felt more like there was like a dialogue going on rather than just like learning from a computer screen. So I would highly recommend having that TA to do that, and exactly like how the other speaker talked about. The TA can help with smaller questions, and if it's related more to the class, because it also helped. We went off not on tangents, but linked to the learning outcomes, but a little bit more creative than anticipated, which benefited the students as well. So I would highly recommend doing that.
Thanks, Stephen. And I'd also add that if you don't have a TA, because you have a very small group, or it's a co-curricular program, it's also possible to ask a student or a participant to do that, in the same way that, Kasha pointed out to me that there was, something going on in the chat there, you had your hand up. You can get help from the group, and it forms community if we all collectively take responsibility for including all the voices. I think we're almost out of time. There's a few questions we haven't been able to answer. I will linger online after the top of the hour to try and answer a few more, but I just wanted to share a couple more slides here with some resources. The experiential learning working group developed a number of PowerPoint slides and documents, so there's some links to those. Those are ones we send out beforehand. CTSI, of course, has great resources. You'll get these slides and links after the session as a follow-up, so you have those for more specific information on some of the topics that you've asked us about today. And then finally, all of us who are here on the call today, on the webinar today, are available if you want to reach out to us with a specific strategy or information that you're interested in pursuing for your own specific context. We're providing our email contact information as well. So on that note, I would like to thank all of our panelists. So let's give them a virtual round of applause. You can hear the thunderous applause in the background. They've done a great job of presenting a number of perspectives across a range of different discipline areas. And so I suggest we stop the recording. Oh, if you would, Ainsley, we'll draw